Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Power of Pop, the Case of the Cultural Influencers, a webinar and key findings from our latest research. I'm Janelle Tribus, Creative Engagement Coordinator at the Opportunity Agenda, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. The Opportunity Agenda is a social justice communication lab. We work with partners to move hearts and minds toward lasting policy and culture change. Today, we'll discuss key findings from our analysis of Colin Kaepernick and the Take a Knee protest, as well as practical recommendations for those seeking to work directly or indirectly with cultural influencers to shift narratives. We're joined this afternoon by three speakers who I'd like to thank for their time. They are Lucy Odiji-Turley, our Manager of Research and Evaluation here at the Opportunity Agenda, Marya Bangee, the Executive Director at Harness, and Erin Potts, Cultural Strategist and Co-Founder of Jumpslide Strategies. We'll be taking questions during a live Q&A at the end of the webinar, so feel free to enter any questions you have into the questions function on your GoToWebinar toolbar. You can enter your questions at any time during the webinar. You can join the conversation online as well by using the hashtag PowerOfPop, that's Power of Pop, or by tweeting at OpAgenda. That's OPPAGENDA. After the webinar, a short evaluation will pop up on your screen, and please take the time to fill that out so we can improve future webinars based on your feedback. Okay, let's get started. Our first speaker will be Lucy Odiji-Turley to take us through the research findings. Lucy, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Janelle, and welcome everyone who is dialing in. Thank you for joining us today. I'm really excited to share the top line findings from our latest report as part of our Power of Pop series, the case of the cultural influencer. So before I dive into the data, I just kind of want to take a step back and provide a little bit of context, the rationale, and how we kind of approach the selection of our different case studies. So I think cultural influencer has become somewhat of a buzzword. We know right now it's really in the zeitgeist to hear the references to influencers. It's something that's seen as relatively new. And so we wanted to kind of make sure that we define that for our audiences before we dived into actually analyzing data. So for the majority of the conversations around popular culture and entertainers working in the advocacy space or the nonprofit space tends to focus around what I would consider the UNICEF model. So this wasn't just an excuse to have a picture of George Clooney up on the screen, by how could you blame me? This is an example of what we found was generally the focus of a lot of existing research. So more transactional relationships where high-profile people are asked to act as an ambassador or act as a spokesperson for an organization, usually to fundraise. That was not the focus of this particular study. We went in with a couple of things in mind. So we were looking for cases where there was a level of authenticity. So a high-profile individual had some level of connection to the issue that they were speaking out about. We were also looking for a certain level of engagement with advocates and people who are already working on the issues, so whether it was just them reaching out to them for advice and the crafting of their messaging or other types of engagement. We didn't want it to just be a situation where, like the UNICEF model, more transactional. However, keep in mind that the three cases we selected were ones that were generally driven by the high-profile people. There are many other cases where the advocacy work is driven by strategists who then recruit cultural influencers. These cases were a little bit more organic from the part of the high-profile people, but there's a lot of insight that can be used to those who are seeking to really be the ones driving the work of the cultural influencer. Three, we were looking for something that people could replicate. So that required us to look for cases where high-profile individuals were making use of actions that other people could incorporate into their own advocacy work. So that includes like the use of social media and different platforms. So we wanted to make sure that these cases were things that included things that were accessible to people more widely in the field. And finally, we wanted to make sure that each of our cases included or made use of a variety of strategies. So someone using their platform, someone using symbolism, someone using their art. We wanted to make sure we had more of a wide breadth of different types and forms of cultural influencer outreach strategy. So before, again, I dive into our findings, I want to quickly go over the research questions that guided us through this particular project. So first, we really wanted to understand what circumstances do cultural influencers have the greatest ability to achieve their goals. So this particular project, we focused again on really high-profile mass cultural influencers. But again, there's many different ways you can be a cultural influencer. There's people who are cultural influencers who have YouTube channels. This particular project focused on those with very huge platforms, so the Jimmy Kimmel, the really kind of A-list celebrities. Secondly, we wanted to know, are cultural influencers interventions best suited for long-term culture change or shorter-term policy shifts or other types of impact? And finally, we wanted to understand how social advocates, such as many of you dialing in today, can best leverage, support, or use the influence of high-profile individuals for both directly and indirectly. So we selected 3 case studies for this project. The first was Jimmy Kimmel and the healthcare debate, specifically his various monologues about the Graham-Cassidy bill. So this particular case study ran from April 2017, so this was a month before Kimmel's first monologue on his late night talk show, and it ran until October 2017, which was 1 month after the Graham-Cassidy bill was ultimately defeated. The second case study, which is still very much going on, and the long-term impacts are still yet to be realized, was the Me Too and Time's Up movement. This particular case ran from April 1st, 2017, and this is when we started seeing a significant spike in mainstream news media coverage related to sexual harassment and gender inequality in the workplace, specifically around events happening at Fox News Corporation. And this particular case study ran until October 1st, 2018, and we recognize again that this issue and this movement is still very much going on, is going to continue to go on for the foreseeable future. And finally, Colin Kaepernick and Take the Knee, and this will be the case study that we focus on specifically today. And our analysis runs from August 1st, 2018, so this was the month when Kaepernick first began taking a knee on the sidelines, to August 1st, 2018, so a 2-year period of analysis. So the first set of findings from the Colin Kaepernick case study focused specifically on the volume and timing of engagement. So this is one of the key ways that we use to measure and judge the impact of his movement and of his protest on the wider conversation related to police misconduct, police brutality, and racism and racial issues more broadly. So what we found, and this is a really important finding, was that there has been a marked increase in both social media and news media engagement related to the killing or harassment of people of color by law enforcement since Kaepernick first began taking a knee at the sideline. This is a finding that many of us wouldn't find surprising, but it's great to actually have the data to back this up. So between July 1st, 2015 and July 31st, 2016, so this is a 1 year preceding Kaepernick beginning his protest, just over 1.6 million social media posts were generated, making specific reference to police misconduct, police brutality, and related phrases. And just over 5,000 news media articles were written within that period. But then we see by September 1st, 2017, between December 2017 and September 2018, there's a significant jump in the level of both social media and news media engagement. So we see over 3.1 million social media posts were generated within that time frame, and over 7,000 news media articles were generated in the US. So that's a significant increase in engagement. Now, one of the key issues that we were aware of is showing causation. So how do we know that this jump and this rise in engagement was related to Colin Kaepernick and his actions? So again, we wanted to see if there was any kind of correlation in the timing and the focus of engagement related to police misconduct as it aligned with Colin Kaepernick and his protest. And so we found that there is, and there was, and it continues to be, a significant correlation between increased social media and news media engagement around Colin Kaepernick, and then a corresponding increase in online and news media engagement with the issue of police misconduct. So we see here, I'll bring your attention to August 2016, which is the first time we begin to see an increase in conversations around Colin Kaepernick, and this is specifically online. At the same time, we see a slight jump in August 2016 to September 2016 in overall conversations related to police misconduct and police brutality. Again, we see a significant jump in online engagement related to discussions of Colin Kaepernick around August, September 2017. And again, we see another significant jump in August 2017 around issues of police misconduct. Our analysis of the content that was generated within these two periods of time showed that people were speaking about police misconduct in direct relation to Colin Kaepernick. These other times where you see significant spikes in engagement were directly related to high-profile killings of people of color by law enforcement. So Colin Kaepernick, along with high-profile killings of people of color, has now been the key ways that we see an increase in people engaging with the issue of police misconduct and police brutality, at least online. The next set of findings relate to news media trends. So we found that overall, news media discourse was slightly more positive than negative, with pro-Kaepernick voices tending to outnumber anti-Kaepernick voices. Now, we did find that around 15% of quotes in our sample of news media articles included members of the public who were expressing anti-Kaepernick sentiment. So this was generally characterized by people not only questioning his protest, but labeling him unpatriotic. And I'll get into a little bit more details about that in a minute. But we also found not only was there a significant amount of quotes from people who were supportive of Kaepernick, supportive of his right to protest, and also the issues that he was trying to uplift, but 13% of quotes within our sample of articles, our random sample of articles, included direct quotes from Kaepernick himself, which really shows the importance of not only high-profile influencers speaking out, but them having clear and concise messaging around what their goals are and what it is they're trying to achieve. So Colin Kaepernick's original statement featured heavily in that 13% of quotes. And so for those of you who aren't familiar, when he was originally asked why he was choosing to kneel, when they first noticed and it began being covered in August 2016, he said, "I'm going to continue to stand with the people that are being oppressed. To me, this is something that has to change. When there is something significant and I feel the flag represents what it's supposed to represent, and this country is representing people that way, that the way it's supposed to, I'll stand." So this again was featured heavily in news media content in the articles that we sampled in that 2-year period. Overall, news media coverage of Colin Kaepernick and his protests fell within 6 broad categories. So 31% of news media articles within our sample focused specifically on Kaepernick's position or lack thereof within the NFL, or his so-called blackballing from the NFL. And that continues just in my quick scan of online discourse, seems to be a significant area of focus to this day. I don't know for any of you who were following the Super Bowl yesterday, you saw that I'm with Cap was trending all the way through the game. 20% of news media articles within our sample focused explicitly on the issue of anti-patriotism and disrespect for the flag. This was specifically uplifting the opposition that had arisen since Kaepernick had been protesting. And so this was a significant area of focus, and this was directly related to another area of news media focus, which was the issue of freedom of speech. This was resulting in other high-profile individuals, including Barack Obama, speaking out about Kaepernick's right to protest. Next, we had around 12% of articles in our sample focused on peer support. So this was other high-profile athletes, entertainers, speaking out in support of Kaepernick and also choosing to take the knee as well at the sideline. 10% of articles focused explicitly on anti-Black racism as it's tied to police brutality and police misconduct, and another 8% were focused explicitly on police brutality. And while some people would be surprised by that finding, because the goal, one of the central goals of his protest was to uplift and bring attention to the issue of racism and police misconduct, specifically how as it impacts people of color, we did find that mentions or some references to police brutality in the original statement that Kaepernick released were woven into other areas of media coverage, even though it wasn't the explicit focus of the particular article at hand. So I just want to take some time to do a deeper dive into those different areas of media coverage. So that's 31% of articles that were focused on Kaepernick's position within the National Football League. So this area of coverage was really, really characterized by other commentators speaking out, whether, both in support and in opposition to Kaepernick, and other advocates and advocacy organizations rallying behind or in support of Kaepernick, or using his protest to uplift issues of hypocrisy, issues of the NFL not taking responsibility, and eventually the concerns around his blackballing from the league, and effectively his speech being him not being able to speak out without consequences. So we see one of the quotes here, which is seen in several of the articles, was a former secretary, press secretary for Bernie Sanders, Simone Sanders, and she says, the NFL is complicit in the ostracization of Colin Kaepernick, and the current climate of the NFL is not really saying anything positive. It's she was really speaking out about the fact that the NFL has effectively chosen the side of people who were against Colin Kaepernick for reasons that had nothing to do with him being patriotic. It was really about them trying to silence him. So another 20% of the articles really touched on this issue of anti-patriotism. It was really from the standpoint of showing the degree of opposition that had arisen since Kaepernick had began to take the knee. And it was really characterized by a lot of quotes from members of the public who were against Kaepernick. So the quote here, where we have a member of the public saying that if he wants to prevent violence, he could do something else, represents a wider trend that we found in media coverage of people effectively arguing that there are other ways to protest, that if he wants to do something, he could, donate. And so this would typically ignore the fact that Colin Kaepernick was doing a lot of things off the field, but that wasn't heavily featured in media coverage. Finally, peer support was typically characterized by folks, generally other high-profile athletes, speaking out both against but generally in support of Kaepernick. So here we see a quote from Tiki Barber where he tweeted, "Cap is using his platform and brand to make a compelling and polarizing point, which is his right, even if it's met with ire." So the next set of findings relate to specifically social media discourse. So we found that social media engagement typically fell into one of 5 categories. So one, and this was the general area that seemed to generate the most engagement online, was anti-Kaepernick rhetoric and also calls to boycott the NFL. So this also had a component of people saying that they want to boycott the NFL because Kaepernick was not employed within it, but it was generally characterized by people arguing that the NFL is no longer a space that they want to engage with, that they don't want to see political messaging, and that it just isn't the right space for Kaepernick to protest. There's other places that he can do it. Number 2, we found a significant portion of social media engagement was related to praise, support, or defense of Kaepernick, usually in direct reaction or relation to that first segment, so the anti-Kaepernick rhetoric. Next, we're followed by blackballing from the league. So this directly aligns with a trend we saw or area of focus from news media coverage. Then the role of other high-profile individuals. So we saw a lot of athletes and other high-profile entertainers speaking out in support. The hashtag I'm with Cap, or this is why we kneel, began to trend shortly after Kaepernick was, effectively blackballed from the league, and has continued to be a trending topic as we saw yesterday. And finally, we found a significant portion of social media engagement focused on instances or images of police brutality. So whenever there was another high-profile shooting or incident involving a person of color, we found that the this is why we kneel hashtag was used in relation to uplifting why Colin Kaepernick's protest was important and resonant with people. Another really important finding is that Kaepernick's protest has become a central element of how people talk about police brutality online. So this visual is showing the phrases and words that were typically associated with the issue of police brutality and police misconduct the year preceding Kaepernick beginning to take a knee. So we see here that Black Lives Matter, Black people, victims of police brutality are phrases that really kind of dominated the conversation. We see Ferguson. So you see a lot here, the reflection of all of the great work that Black Lives Matter and other advocacy organizations have done to uplift not only the issue of police brutality, but how it intersects with anti-Black racism in the United States. So this next visualization shows the top phrases to emerge in relation to discussion of police misconduct and police brutality since Kaepernick has begun to take the knee, so between August 2016 and August 2018. And you see here that now racial justice has emerged. We see brown people, we see women. We also see Colin Kaepernick, NFL national anthem. So not only is Kaepernick now central to the conversation around police brutality, but it's also become a more intersectional conversation where we're recognizing that police brutality is impacting many communities, particularly communities of color, but also women of color also. Really great finding was that pro-Kaepernick voices dominated on Twitter and in Twitter content. So we see here a particular post from Jamel Hill, who has been a very vocal supporter of Colin Kaepernick, received over, nearly 300,000 likes. And this was one of the key pieces of content related to Colin Kaepernick and his protest. We also found that imagery was really, really popular. And not only images of Colin Kaepernick protesting, but images that really pointed out the hypocrisy of people who were arguing that there were better places or better ways to protest. So I want to quickly go through what we found the overarching impact was of Colin Kaepernick since he began taking the knee in August 2016. I was only able to share just some of the findings from our report. The full report is online, as well as the other 2 case studies. But what we found is that Colin Kaepernick altogether has resulted in a significant marked increase in people's discussion of police brutality and anti-Blackness in both social media and in news media content. It's generated a significant amount of content and engagement online around a range of issues, or specifically around freedom of speech and what it means to actually be patriotic in the United States. It resulted in periodic increases in people's engagement with the issues of police brutality. So when there is another instance of police brutality, and we know that they come up constantly and people are trying to find ways to engage and talk about it, they continue to return to the conversation related to Colin Kaepernick and why he kneels. It sparked corresponding debates, as I mentioned earlier, related to patriotism, the role of athletes and other high-profile people in the social justice advocacy space. As we saw, LeBron James spoke out about why he won't just shut up and dribble. And so it really is reflective of a wider movement of how high-profile people taking up a more active role within the advocacy space. It's created a symbolic movement. So we've seen that content related to him kneeling, artistic expression has been generated, and the symbolism of his kneeling has been really, really powerful. And it's led to other athletes and high-profile people speaking out and replicating his work. And it's created a slogan that continues to be relevant. This is why we kneel, and now I'm with Cap. So I want to quickly work through some recommendations, and these recommendations relate specifically to those who are seeking to leverage or support the work that cultural influencers have started. There are recommendations in the report that are for those of you who are working directly with influencers. So first is really just to keep the drumbeat going. We found that there was times ebbs and flows of when Kaepernick and Take the Knee were engaged with online and in the news media, and that it was really people on the ground who have kept an overall level of engagement. So this can be done by just engaging with his hashtag, writing op-eds, and really kind of continuing to uplift why his protest is important, and really the underlining issue, which is police brutality and the fact that when people speak out against it, they're ostracized. Expand the conversation, as we've seen that Colin Kaepernick's protests and others have opened up many, many dialogues about other related issues, from patriotism, what it means, and how patriotism actually means being able to speak out and critique your nation, not blindly following things. So expand the conversation, intersect it with other things, and we see that it actually results in a more intersectional and expansive conversation related around these really, really critical issues. And finally, publicly support the influencers who are speaking out. We found that Colin Kaepernick received tons of support from advocacy organizations and also from other high-profile individuals, and it in many ways raised their profile too. So one great way for advocates seeking to support or leverage the work of an influencer is to make a public statement in support of their work and what they're doing. Some specific tactics related to Colin Kaepernick, but also the other cases, is the continuing engagement with hashtags, the recirculation of content, the uplisting of imagery, which we found to be really, really powerful. And then again, using the work of these advocates to uplift your own work, whether it's writing op-eds, writing insight posts to connect the dots for audiences who may not know, but may have all of a sudden be interested or sparked based on what they're seeing in popular entertainment. So that was a lot of content. For those who want to take a deeper dive, please go on our website. The full report is up, and key findings for all three of the case studies. For those who would like more information about our methodology, feel free to email me at lodgturley@opinionagenda.org, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucy. I'm going to invite Marya and Erin to share their insights from the research and from their own experiences. They have decades of experience between them working on cultural and influencer strategies, and we're really honored to have them with us today. Marya Bangee is Executive Director of Harness, an organization that works within Hollywood to center the narratives of marginalized communities in popular culture. Started by America Ferrera, Wilmer Valderrama, and Ryan Pierce Williams, Harness envisions a world where human rights are protected by the power of the people through fostering collaborations between artists and activists and driving a conversation for social change within the entertainment industry. Marya started her journey as a community organizer in the Muslim American community and has become a leading strategist in changing narratives through pop culture. Erin Potts is a social entrepreneur and cultural strategist who has been on a 2-decades-long mission to help artists create change, guide organizations and movements toward financial sustainability, and bring together teams to achieve the impossible. With the Beastie Boys, she co-founded the Milarepa Fund and the Tibetan Freedom Concerts. She's established and led several other nonprofits, including Revolutions Per Minute, a nonprofit agency that has become a model for artist engagement and cultural strategy. Erin currently runs Jumpsite Strategies, a consulting firm specializing in cultural, campaign, and management research and strategies. So Marya, I'll invite you to speak first. We'd love to hear your perspective on the research and how it relates to the work that you do at Harness.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Well, first, I wanted to thank Opportunity Agenda. That was an incredible presentation. We're really excited about the ongoing research in this area. And as Harness, a lot of the work that we do is around kind of using the power and voice and platforms of cultural influencers to be able to raise awareness and attention to important social issues. And so it's incredible to see kind of the way that Opportunity Agenda has looked at Colin Kaepernick as a case study, as well as Jimmy Kimmel and the work that's been done around healthcare. Can we go to my slides, please? I'll talk a little bit, I think, about Harness overall, and then we can kind of jump into a conversation with Erin, who's done such incredible work in this field. A little bit about kind of the work that we do as Harness, as was mentioned in the introduction. We were started by people within the entertainment industry, America, Wilmer, and Ryan, to really think about how to leverage the power of people who are often the gatekeepers of popular culture. So whether they're involved in entertainment through film, through television, through music, and really bringing them together with leaders of social justice movements and people working on really pressing social issues to be able to start and shape the national conversation around these issues. Obviously, as was demonstrated by this research, it's really important that there's more work done where there's coordination between artists and activists so that we can really start to shape the national conversation because there's a lot of misinformation out there and there's a lot of gaps in knowledge, and specifically for a lot of the artists that we work for, they're looking for ways to use their voice, use their art for social justice, but they're not sure how to do so. And so I think this research is really important because it starts to demonstrate the ways in which artists can be integrated into kind of existing work that's happening and use their platform in really effective ways. one of the lessons that I would say I take away from the example with Colin Kaepernick is that Colin made that decision to, take a knee as a really powerful visual symbol that is also replicable. So it's not just dependent on him. One of the amazing things that it does as a simple and powerful symbol is it allows for other athletes and other people to be able to replicate it and use their agency to continue to grow this movement. And then obviously there was coordination between him and other powerful social justice movements like Black Lives Matter to really start to drive the conversation around police brutality. And so one of the points that I think we would make as Harness is that artists are people that are looking for ways to leverage their voice just like any other person. And I think that the power of our social movements, the power of our organizing is how can we, think about culture as another tool in our toolbox to really promote, justice in different ways, equity in different ways. And I think that one of the ways we can think about that is the power of symbol, the power of narrative, and how do we, really simplify complex issues into something that people can engage with and own and use in their platforms. So yeah, I think because we don't have the slides, I think I'll end there. And if Erin, if you want to jump in, and then we can kind of discuss a little bit more about the research.
Awesome. Janelle, is it okay if I go next, or did you want to do something else first?
Oh, no, that's great. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Great. Well, I'll start by just saying, from which has almost nothing to do with the presentation, but from where I sit, which admittedly is in New Orleans, I think it's clear that Colin Kaepernick, Janet Jackson, and the Saints really won the Super Bowl yesterday. Having said that, I have a few thoughts on the actual presentation. And I want to sort of give a bit of a bigger frame on the report, which Lucy talked about, that there's a difference between celebrity strategy, like what UNICEF does, and influencer strategy. But influencer strategies that are part of a broader cultural strategy, I think are better because they can become confused with the celebrity strategy that Lucy was talking about at the beginning. If they're integrated into a broader cultural strategy, then it's more that we are seeing influencers as allies to social justice work and not using influencers to do just social justice work. And I think it's really important distinction that we don't use anybody to do this kind of work. So I would advise people to really think about a broader cultural strategy within which a broader cultural strategy within which an influencer strategy sits. Another important part of that is really understanding what is the movement's role in that work and what is the influencer's role in that work. As Lucy mentioned, a lot of the examples in this report were sort of organic, where the influencer wanted to do this and they worked with organizers in most of these cases to continue that work, but it really was driven by the influencer themselves. And I think that points to a good role where organizers and people in the campaign can really, they're good at keeping it in the news, that keeping the drumbeat going and expanding the conversation that Lucy talked about. But I think that from the movement side, we sometimes forget that justice making really is a team sport. And we often act like little kids playing sports. If you've ever seen kids playing soccer or basketball, it's, all the kids on the court or on the field all run to the ball. And as they're running, they're falling on each other and they're getting back up and they're falling down again. And it's really, really cute, but it has no strategy at all. So that's not how we should be running our movements. And I think it's really important to understand what our role is on the team and play it really, really well, and what everybody else's role is on the team. And to that end, I would say that I think we really need to invest as a movement in supporting not just these cultural moments, but also more broadly supporting artists and influencers. Again, seeing them as allies to social justice work, not just people that get brought in at the last minute for something, or otherwise sort of used. And then just one point I want to make on that Lucy has made, but I want to sort of re-emphasize, is that, and also Marya, sorry, you also made this point, but the authenticity point is really critical, that the relevance of the issue and the things that the influencer is talking about to their own lives and the audiences that they reach. When we think about the cultural context of football and who watches it, it makes the fact that Colin Kaepernick standing up metaphorically, but kneeling literally, more important, because it is so matching sort of, we always talk about matching message and medium, but in this, I think we really need to think about what are the cultural mediums that are best for our issues and our work, and then thinking about influencer strategies and cultural strategies from that point of view too. I think I'll end there because I think that there's more conversation that we're about to have, but those are my big points. And thanks for letting me be part of this.
Thank you. And Marya, I just wanted to, from this point forward, I'd love Marya and Erin, if you wanted to just offer your thoughts based on what you're saying, or any additional thoughts about the research.
Yeah, I think that this is really useful, because one of the things that I think our field needs to think about more, and by our field, I think people that are working in culture change, specifically pop culture change, is what are the categories that we want to think about when we think about how to engage with artists. So I so resonate and agree with Erin about making sure that it's not a transactional relationship with artists, and that we are making sure that the engagement is authentic to who they are as individuals, to their experience. And I think beyond that, one of the things that I'm very interested in is how do we start to map out the ways in which this engagement is categorized into different models almost that we can utilize. So for example, do we want to work with a cultural influencer to provide them an immersive experience in the issue area that we're working with, so that then activates them and they're able to use that in their art, right, as an example, because often cultural influencers are creatives, they're artists, right? So how do we understand creatives and artists, and how do we engage with them in that way, so that they're able to use their superpower, which is art, to be able to talk about this in a way that's more expansive than perhaps we have access to. How do we think about this work more broadly than just, what has often been done traditionally, which is social media or having people show up to a specific event, but more broadly in terms of, maybe engaging an artist and thinking about the symbols around a specific campaign, or thinking with an artist about what are specific cultural moments, like the Oscars, for example, where Time's Up, or the Golden Globes, where people can use an award ceremony to activate around a specific social issue. So I think for me, one of the things that I think would be a huge step forward is for us to start really being able to map out models that are replicable and that allow us to think in a more sophisticated way about the ways that artists and activists are able to partner with each other.
Yeah, and I'll just add that I'm seeing more of a conversation or a feedback loop between artists and activists. And I think a great example of that is Beyonce's Formation, where Black Lives Matter started, and then Beyonce took some of the imagery of the Black Panthers and the demonstrations she was seeing on the streets, and then played, since the theme is Super Bowl, I'm going to be talking about it all the time, but she played the Super Bowl halftime show in Black Panther-esque, sort of a sexy Black Panther kind of outfit. And then fast forward a couple of months later, and we see young Black women in Chicago shutting down the highway wearing those exact same outfits. So I think, you know, that's an example of that conversation that can happen. And I think so, you know, part of influencer strategy is being in conversation with folks, not just pitching, like, can you tweet this? But really trying to be a part of the conversation, the cultural conversation.
Yeah, and this is something, Erin, you and I talked a little bit about in terms of even how do we engage with an artist, right? I think one of the issues that people probably struggle with is like access. So, you know, I work on this really important social issue, but I don't have access to a cultural influencer that can elevate the profile of this work to another level. How do I do that? And I think that one of the things that we've seen, and I think your example speaks to, is like the more resonant that we're able to leverage kind of like symbols and narrative in our social justice movements, the more that we're going to attract all kinds of people into a conversation around that issue, right? And so influencers are an example of people who will be attracted to a social issue based on the conversation that's happening to that. So the more we can think about narrative and story and symbol as tools that we use in our social justice movements, the more effectively we'll be able to kind of engage with artists, I think. So I'd love to know kind of like, what have your experiences been in that area?
Are you asking me particularly or the audience in general?
You particularly.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to I think you're making a really, really important point. I wanted to actually build on it and talk about there's some cultural experts that talk about how what they're seeing out there in the world is that brands, celebrities, and individuals are becoming more and more blurred, and they're starting to act more and more like each other. So we see brands telling stories and acting, you know, in more intimate ways than we have in the past, and celebrities tweeting their breakfast, and individuals acting like celebrities and tweeting their breakfast, I guess. And so I think that the idea of what an influencer is really expanding. And as Lucy said at the beginning, you know, there can be some definition. We can apply some definition to it, but I think it really, you know, begets the question for us, like, what is the role of movements in this moment where all of these things are blurring together, and what is the role of movement in the conversation? I wish I could send everybody a quick 30-minute video, but I'm going to encourage you all to watch it. It's called The Culture of Proximity 1.0, and it's from Viacom study. And it's just a really interesting read on how culture is right now. And I think it has some things that people can draw from that study for this work. I guess I want to say one other thing too, actually, which is, you know, I think a lot of people are probably asking, like, you know, from the movement side, they're probably asking, you know, how do we, if we're not already involved in cultural strategies and the cultural conversation, sort of how do we start? And I would just say that one of the best ways to start is to start letting culture into your organization. You know, talk about what's happening in sports and music and TV and film, and really try and think about what's happening in culture and how that not just affects your particular issue, but the cultural lives of the people that you're talking to, who are your constituents or who are the communities that you're working with. And I would say, you know, we can start hiring for culture or cultural knowledge, you know. So hiring somebody who's a huge music fan to do organizing is maybe a place where we should start moving towards, just to be able to start bringing that and fandoms and cultural content, and they'll know the cultural moments even before, before the rest of the world necessarily does. They might see something happening that we can step into.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Erin.
and
That's
I think
actually a great Sorry, go ahead, Marya, respond, and then I'm going to transition us to Q&A.
Yeah, of course. The last point I would make there is just that one of the things that we've seen is that it's almost like activists speak a different language than folks that are culture makers, right? There's like it's almost like there's translation that happens. And so the more that, I'm a community organizer. I come from that world. I love things like data and research. I love thinking about tactics and, strategy. But when you're talking about culture, it's a different language. It's a different way of thinking about the world. And so I think, Erin, your point about starting to bring culture into our organizations and into kind of the way that we think about our work is really important, because it's not easy. It's kind of shifting to kind of a different way of thinking about the way that we do our activism. And one thing that I've been really moved by is the power of art to provide resiliency and healing in activist spaces, because I think often so many of us are constantly in this place of crisis or rapid response, right? We're dealing with so many situations that require immediate action, and we're on the front lines and dealing with trauma, et cetera. And I think that art can be this incredible way of stepping away from the urgency of the situation and thinking about things in a way that opens up new opportunities and new solutions, but also provides space for healing and resiliency for us. And so I'm really excited about the possibilities of bringing artists and activists together for our movements, because I think there's a lot of benefits to us kind of coordinating outside of just, leveraging culture as another kind of strategy. And I think that for me, there's a really important thing that we just have to name, which is literally there are different languages that are often being spoken, and a different modality, a different way of thinking. And so it's important for us to know that there are challenges when we start to engage with culture as part of our toolbox, but that's hopefully in the long term, it's actually going to really enrich in the work that we do and provide new opportunities. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Marya. Thank you both. Incredibly thought-provoking conversation. And I'm sure folks listening are chomping at the bit to put in a few questions. So folks who are listening, now is the time for us to do an audience Q&A, and we can take questions from you. You just answer any questions you have into the questions function on your GoToWebinar toolbar. We already have first question. And this is directed particularly to Marya and Erin, although Lucy, if you see anything playing out in your research, please also contribute as well. So the example of the Kaepernick story is really interesting because it increased the attention on issues in such a dramatic way. At the same time, Kaepernick was really centered in that conversation, and that a lot of that conversation actually happened about Kaepernick himself as opposed to the issues. And we have also examples of influencers who have, from a progressive standpoint, you could argue, have a negative impact on society, or are putting out values or talking about things that impact things negatively. And so the question is, when influencers become activists, whether it's for positive social change or for negative social change, when are they helpful to movements? And in the case of when they're positive, when are they helpful to movements? And when might they accidentally undermine movement priorities? And is there a way for them to get involved and uplift the issues without becoming the center of the conversation? And at the same time, is there a way, how do we deal with when influencers have a platform and are espousing negative values that we think work against what we're trying to build? So those are maybe two separate questions, but I'm combining them so you can take a stab at it. So who would like to try and answer that first?
I just want to throw out something that's probably going to be a little bit controversial, but the bit about the when folks are saying things that go against our pursuit of justice. I think we have to be really, really careful, because if we start saying "shut up and sing" or "shut up and dribble," we're going to undermine the work that can be done when it's an artist or an influencer saying something that helps our cause. And so I have, for 25 years of doing this work, I have been a proponent of engaged, that artists and athletes do not give up their citizenship and their right to speak when they become famous, that they can say anything that they want. Sometimes I have been in working with artists, had palm to head moments where I'm like, oh, why did they say that? Or why did they say it that way? But I will never censor an artist, ever. The way to get around the whoops moments on working with cultural leaders is to invest in them, to support them, to help build their capacity and their confidence to do this work for, in some cases, years before a cultural moment happens. Sometimes we don't have that ability to have worked with somebody for years, but we can certainly jump in and support them in the moment. But I think, criticizing anybody, and it's hard for me. I disagree wholeheartedly with Ted Nugent, and I think probably everything he says. But I have to be able to say it's his right to say it, just like it's Colin Kaepernick's right to say things, or Jimmy Kimmel's.
Right. I think the thing I would add to that is that influencers are people just like all of us, and we've all been on a journey of learning and growing. And I think that so to Erin's point, investing in education and experience so that people can be equipped to properly leverage their voice is extremely important if you can do that. But the other thing I would say is messengers absolutely matter. Like, who is the messenger absolutely matters, right? Different people have varying levels of authenticity, of credibility, of proximity to an issue. And so really thinking about who are the messengers that make sense for your issue is really important. And, this conversation is happening with or without us, because artists are speaking on things that they care about, right? And that's as Erin said, that's their right as citizens. They just have an outsized impact. So how is it that we identify the right artists that really feel aligned with our values and who are open to working with the movement and who are open to working with community partners to really understand an issue and understand how they can use their art in a powerful way. And I think that a large part of the work Harness does is this piece about educating artists and really trying to set up a model where people are not speaking in a vacuum, but they are speaking in partnership with community partners. I mean, America, one of our co-founders, that was something that she was really passionate about with Time's Up, was bringing community leaders to the red carpet and making sure that they were there to help shape the conversation and to direct people towards actions that would be really impactful for movements and for communities overall. So I think that that's a really important piece to think about.
Thank you. And we have another question about small scale influencers, or I've heard the term micro-influencers. So, we've mentioned Colin Kaepernick, Beyonce, America Ferrera in this conversation. Those are folks who are a little bit out of reach, I think, for a lot of advocates. You can't just put them up on the phone, but in different regions and even nationally, there are smaller scale influencers who are influential maybe on YouTube, or smaller bands, for example, who maybe tour, or even within a community, somebody who an artist a lot of people respect. Can you talk about the role of these micro-influencers in moving and spreading narratives, and for folks who can't maybe access the larger, these larger mass-scale influencers, how can they think about trying to engage influencers that they can access?
Marya, you want to take it, or you want me to take it first?
Why don't you start?
Okay. When I was running Revolutions Per Minute, I used to get so many phone calls from organizers asking me to get them Bruce Springsteen. I don't know what it was about Bruce Springsteen, but like it was always Bruce Springsteen that they wanted. And I would always tell them, like, listen, you love Bruce Springsteen, I love Bruce Springsteen. The kids that you're working with don't know who the hell Bruce Springsteen is. I was like, so go ask them, who are their influencers? Ask the interns in your office, ask your kids if you have them, who are the people that they care about, and then start having a conversation with them, start supporting them in their activism, and lead up to the possibility of doing a benefit concert or you know, whatever the thing would have been that folks always wanted Bruce Springsteen to do. But you know, the smaller artist or influencer, in my mind, actually has they might not have as much scale as the bigger artists and influencers, but they have a more intimate relationship with their fan base, meaning you know, their fans are going to really listen to what they say and really be excited about it. You know, maybe not in agreement always, but certainly more respectful, I guess. So I would really look at, you know, who, you know, if you have a particular audience or community that you work with, start asking them, you know, include cultural consumption questions on surveys that you do. You know, when you're asking them, how did they like that event, or, you know, what did they do, you know, about the different activities that you've done together this year. Ask them what movies, what music, what local culture makers they are following, and go from there.
Yeah, I think we're coming to time, but just to add a couple things, definitely the larger an artist is doesn't make them the more effective for your specific organization or issue. What we've seen is that you really have to identify who has resonance with the audience that you're trying to move, right? And that might be someone that's a local artist who has, you know, credibility with the people that you're trying to move, and so to engage with them on this issue might be much more effective than getting someone that has a much higher platform but doesn't have resonance with the audience that you're going for. So I absolutely think it's not really about the platform of the influencer, although I think that helps and it's a variable. I think it's about picking the right messenger, and there's so many variables involved with that. But one of the variables that I think we should really think about is credibility and legitimacy, because as much as celebrity and influencer is important, at the end of the day, there's also distrust, right? And so you have to think about, like, who is the messenger that's going to make sense for my audience. And one last thing I would say on that is that new media and kind of like the emerging YouTube and Instagram influencers are an incredible tool, or not an incredible tool, I should say, an incredible group of artists that are leveraging new tools for millennial audiences and for younger folks. I remember we worked with a YouTube star around some GeoTV work, and the YouTube star had more impact than any of the A-list people we worked with, because she had this incredibly large following. And it was a large following that trusted her, and you know, the brand that she had built was demystifying complex issues for them and explaining to them in an easy way how to get involved. And so the impact that she had was incredible. So knowing the power of the messenger that you're using, or the artist, is really important, because you have to be clear about what will work for your audience. So
thank you so much, Marya. So thank you again to Lucy, Marya, and Erin for sharing all of your amazing knowledge with us today. We, again, as Lucy mentioned, have released our Power of Pop, the Case of the Cultural Influencers report You can download the executive summary or the full report on our website, and we'll also be sending you a link with this recording and a follow-up email, and we'll be adding it to our website tomorrow so you can share that with any colleagues who couldn't make it today. As you close out of GoToWebinar, a short evaluation will pop up. Please fill that out so we can make sure we're offering the best possible content to partners in the future. Thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great day.